I accidentally overheard my best friend talking about me at 2 in the morning. That sentence sounds dramatic now, like something pulled from one of those fake Reddit posts people read on YouTube. But at the time, it felt weirdly small, quiet, like one of those moments that doesn't seem important until your entire life starts dividing itself into before and after. My name's Vincent, and this happened during our last semester of college. Chase and I had been best friends since freshman year. Same dorm floor, same terrible intro to psychology class, same habit of staying awake until 3 in the morning talking about absolutely nothing. For years later, we were still attached at the hip. Everyone knew us as a pair. Where's Chase? Probably with Vincent. Have you seen Vincent? Check Chase's apartment. That was us. And honestly, I never thought too hard about what that meant because thinking too hard about Chase was dangerous. He was one of those guys who made people comfortable instantly. Loud laugh. Easy smile. The kind of person who remembered tiny details about you and brought them up months later like they mattered. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 5 new friends. Meanwhile, I was quieter, more careful, the kind of guy who stayed near the wall at parties pretending to text when my social battery died. Chase always dragged me into things anyway. You're not escaping tonight, he'd say, grabbing my hoodie sleeve. Or, if I have to suffer through this party, so do you. And somehow, I always went. By 22, we practically lived together even though technically we had separate apartments. I kept clothes at his place. He knew my coffee order better than I did. Half our conversations happened without actual words. The problem was that somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like a normal best friend. And I knew better than to say anything. Because Chase was straight. At least, I thought he was. He dated girls occasionally. Not seriously, but enough for me to file him mentally into the absolutely unavailable category and lock the door behind it. So I did what any sane person does when they fall for their best friend. I buried it alive. I dated other people. Pretended I didn't notice how good he looked after basketball games. Pretended my chest didn't tighten whenever someone flirted with him at bars. Mostly, I got good at lying to myself. Then came the night everything cracked open. It was early November, freezing outside, and Chase had invited a bunch of people over to his apartment for drinks after a football game. Nothing huge. Maybe 10 people crowded into his living room. Music low, empty pizza boxes everywhere. I almost didn't go because I had an assignment due the next morning. You're coming, Chase said over the phone. I'm literally working. You've been working for 6 hours. And you're annoying when you isolate yourself. Get over here. So I went. That was always my mistake with him. I always went. The night itself felt normal at first. Chase was moving around the apartment laughing with everyone, throwing chips at people, arguing loudly about sports he barely even followed. Every once in a while, he'd pass behind me and tap my shoulder or hand me another drink without asking. Little things. Always little things. Around midnight, people started leaving in groups. Then more people left. Then suddenly it was just me, Chase, and 2 of his friends from one of his business classes, Ethan and Marcus. I didn't know them well, just enough to recognize them around campus. I'm gonna head out too, I said eventually, standing up from the couch. Chase immediately looked over. Dude, just stay here. I have class at 9. You say that like you're actually going. Marcus laughed from the kitchen. Vincent's the responsible one. Exactly, Chase replied. One of us has to survive adulthood. I rolled my eyes, but honestly I was already considering staying. That wasn't unusual. I crashed at his place constantly. Eventually Chase pointed toward the hallway. Take my bed. I'll sleep out here. You literally own the bed, I said. And you literally complain about my couch every time. Fair point. So I stayed. At around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up thirsty. The apartment was dark except for the kitchen light. I could hear voices from the living room, low, tired conversation. I assumed Marcus and Ethan were still there for some reason. I walked halfway down the hallway before I heard my name. Not loudly, just enough to stop me cold. Does Vincent know? Marcus asked. Silence. Then Chase said quietly. No. Something about his tone rooted me to the floor. I know I should have walked away. Seriously. I know. But hearing your own name in the middle of the night does something to you. He seriously has no idea? Ethan asked. Nope. You're insane, Marcus muttered. I moved closer before my brain could stop me, standing just out of sight near the hallway corner. My pulse was suddenly loud enough to feel in my throat. Then Chase laughed softly. Not embarrassed. Not nervous. Just tired. I'm working on it, he said. Working on what? I remember gripping the wall so hard my fingers hurt. Marcus spoke again. Bro, you've been working on it for like a year. A year. The room went quiet for a second before Chase finally said the sentence that changed everything. I'm in love with him, all right. My entire body froze. I actually thought I imagined it. I mean, fully, genuinely convinced myself I heard wrong. Because Chase didn't say things like that. About me. Not in real life. Ethan let out a long breath. Then tell him. I can't. Why? Another silence. Then, quieter this time. Because if he doesn't feel the same way, I lose the most important person in my life. I stopped breathing for a second. There are moments where your brain just fails to catch up with reality. That was one of them. Everything I'd buried for years suddenly came rushing back all at once, every look, every almost moment, every stupid thing I convinced myself didn't mean anything. And the worst part? Some deep, horrible, hopeful part of me immediately started replaying everything differently. The way Chase always touched me first in crowds. How he remembered every tiny thing about me. Why no girl ever lasted long around him. Why everyone always joked we acted married. Oh my God, Marcus muttered. You're gone. Yeah, Chase replied quietly. No jokes this time. No deflection. Just honesty. And hearing him sound that vulnerable almost hurt more than the confession itself. Ethan spoke carefully. You know he cares about you. I know, Chase said. Then maybe. No. Chase interrupted immediately. Don't do that. Don't give me false hope. False hope. I had spent 2 years thinking that exact phrase about him. I should have walked into the room then. Should have said something. Anything. Instead, I panicked. Because suddenly this wasn't fantasy anymore. It was real. Real enough to destroy us if I handled it wrong. So like an idiot, I backed away quietly before they could notice me. And somehow, that felt even worse. I barely slept after that. I lay in Chase's bed staring at the ceiling while my brain spiraled itself into knots. Chase loved me. The sentence didn't even sound real internally. Every time I almost accepted it, another voice in my head immediately argued back. Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe he meant something else. Maybe it was drunk emotional nonsense. But deep down, I knew. Because suddenly too many things made sense. At some point around 4 in the morning, I heard the apartment finally go quiet. Doors shutting. Footsteps. Then silence. A few minutes later, Chase's bedroom door opened slowly. I shut my eyes immediately. I heard him move around quietly near the bed, probably looking for a charger or blanket or something. But then everything stopped. I could feel him standing there. Just standing beside the bed in the dark. My heart was beating so hard I was convinced he could hear it. Then, very softly, I heard him sigh. And after a few seconds, he whispered, "Good night, Vin." The way he said my name almost destroyed me. Then he left. And somehow that tiny moment hit harder than the confession itself. Because there was something painfully genuine about it. Like he'd gotten used to loving me quietly when no one was watching. Including me. I didn't sleep at all after that. The next morning felt unbearable. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just painfully normal. That was somehow worse. I woke up around 8 to the smell of coffee drifting through the apartment, and for a second my brain forgot everything. Then it all slammed back into me at once. I'm in love with him, all right. I stayed lying in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out how the hell I was supposed to walk into the kitchen and act casual now. Because what was the alternative? Hey Chase, funny story, I accidentally overheard you confessing your love for me at 3 in the morning. Yeah, great plan. I heard footsteps outside the bedroom door. Then a knock. Vin. Chase called softly. You alive? My chest tightened immediately. Yeah. I answered, forcing my voice steady. Coffee's ready. God. He sounded normal. I sat there for another 10 seconds before finally dragging myself out of bed. When I walked into the kitchen, Chase was leaning against the counter in gray sweatpants and an old hoodie, scrolling through his phone like this was any other morning. Meanwhile, I felt like my entire nervous system was on fire. He glanced up when he saw me and smiled automatically. Morning. There it was again. That stupid smile that always ruined me. Morning, I managed. He slid a mug toward me without asking how I take my coffee, because of course he already knew. Our fingers brushed accidentally. Usually that wouldn't have mattered. Now it felt catastrophic. You look tired, he said. I almost laughed at the understatement. Couldn't sleep. Yeah, me neither. Something about the way he said it made me look up. For half a second, we just stared at each other. and suddenly I wondered if he somehow knew I'd heard everything. But then he looked away first, rubbing the back of his neck like he was uncomfortable for reasons completely unrelated to me having a full emotional breakdown internally. "So," he said lightly, "you still planning to go to class?" I blinked. "Huh, you're 9 a.m.? Oh, right." He snorted quietly. "You definitely forgot that existed." Normally we fell into conversation effortlessly, but that morning every word felt dangerous. I kept noticing things I'd trained myself not to notice before. The way Chase watched me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. How naturally he moved around me. How every tiny touch lingered a second too long. Or maybe I was imagining it now because I knew. That possibility terrified me too. "You okay?" Chase asked suddenly. I looked up too fast. "Yeah. What? You're being weird." "Well," I said carefully, "I did get like 4 hours of sleep." "Fair." He studied me another second anyway. Then his phone buzzed on the counter. "Marcus." I saw Chase's expression shift instantly the second he read the notification. Not panic exactly, but definitely alertness. He grabbed the phone a little too quickly, and suddenly I knew. Marcus knew I'd heard, or at least suspected it. My stomach dropped. "You sure you're all right?" Chase asked again. "Yeah," I lied immediately. He nodded slowly like he didn't believe me at all. The tension stayed there all morning. Not obvious enough that anyone else would notice, but enough to make me feel insane. By noon, I was sitting through a lecture without absorbing a single word. My phone buzzed 3 times during class. "Chase, you disappeared fast this morning." Then, did I do something? Then finally, Vin. I stared at the messages for a long time. This was the problem with Chase. Even when he was the source of my emotional collapse, my first instinct was still to make sure he felt okay. Me, just tired. Promise. The typing bubble appeared instantly. "Chase, you sure?" I should have told him. Maybe not everything, but something. Instead, "Yeah." 3 dots again. Then, "All right, come over tonight." My chest tightened painfully. Because before last night, that invitation would have felt easy. Automatic. Now it felt loaded. Still, I replied. "Okay." Of course I did. By the time I got to Chase's apartment that evening, I had spent nearly 12 straight hours overthinking every interaction we'd ever had. Which was apparently not enough because the second he opened the door, my brain stopped functioning anyway. "You look stressed," he said immediately. "Thanks. I mean it." "I know." He stepped aside to let me in, watching me carefully the entire time. The apartment was quieter than usual. No music. No TV running in the background. Just us. Dangerous. Chase leaned against the kitchen counter while I dropped my backpack near the couch. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he asked. Straight to the point. That was new. I shrugged too quickly. "Nothing's going on." Vincent, the full name. He only used it when he was serious. "You've barely looked at me all day," he continued. "And this morning felt weird. Because I heard you confess your love for me." I swallowed hard. "You're imagining things." "No, I'm not." His voice softened slightly. "Did I upset you somehow?" God. The concern in his face made this 10 times harder because it reminded me that Chase genuinely cared about me. Maybe more than anyone else ever had. And suddenly I understood why he'd never said anything. Because now that I knew, everything felt terrifyingly fragile. "I'm fine," I said quietly. Chase stared at me for a long moment. Then he sighed and walked closer. "Okay," he said softly. "You're not fine, but okay." The proximity alone was enough to wreck me now. He smelled like laundry detergent and coffee, painfully familiar things that suddenly felt intimate. I stepped back instinctively, and Chase noticed. That hurt him. I saw it instantly. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly before he covered it with a small nod. "Right. There it is," I thought miserably. "He thinks I'm pulling away because I found out." Which technically wasn't wrong. "Vin," he said carefully, "if something happened." Nothing happened. Too fast. Too sharp. Silence dropped between us immediately. Chase looked genuinely confused now. And guilty. Like he was mentally replaying the previous night, trying to figure out what he'd done wrong. Then quietly, "Was it Marcus?" I froze. His eyes narrowed slightly the second he saw my reaction. "What did Marcus say to you?" Panic shot straight through me. "Nothing." "Vincent." I said nothing. "Okay, now I know you're lying." He sounded more worried than angry, which somehow made me feel worse. I looked away first because I physically couldn't handle eye contact anymore. And that's when Chase said the absolute worst possible thing. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" I almost laughed. Because technically, yeah, I probably could. But admitting I overheard him saying he loved me would change everything permanently. And I still didn't know if I was brave enough for that. I lasted exactly 2 more days before completely falling apart internally. Not externally, though. Externally, I was incredible. I went to class, answered emails, pretended I wasn't losing my mind every time Chase texted me something simple like, "Did you eat yet?" Or, "Movie tonight?" Or worse, "Missed you today?" That one nearly killed me. Because now every normal thing he said carried weight behind it. Hidden meaning. And once you know someone loves you, it becomes impossible to stop searching for evidence that they always have. Turns out, there was a lot of evidence. Too much, honestly. By Thursday night, I was sitting on my apartment floor trying to write a paper while rereading old texts from Chase like a complete psychopath. "You got home safe? Wear the blue hoodie tomorrow. It looks good on you. Proud of you. Miss you already." That last one appeared way more than I realized. I dropped my phone onto the carpet and covered my face with both hands. Oh my God, because the worst part wasn't that Chase loved me. The worst part was realizing he'd probably been trying to tell me for years in every way except directly. And somehow I missed all of it. My phone buzzed again. "Chase, you alive over there?" I stared at the screen. Then, "Come downstairs." I blinked. "Me? What?" "Chase, just do it." 2 minutes later, I walked outside my building and found him leaning against his car holding a takeout bag. "You looked stressed," he said immediately. "You drove over here because I looked stressed?" "You weren't answering fast enough." I laughed before I could stop myself, and Chase visibly relaxed the second he heard it. That hit me hard too. "You're insane," I told him. "Probably." He handed me the food bag. "My favorite burger place." "Of course. You remembered." "Vincent," he said dryly. "You order the same thing every time." Still, something warm twisted painfully in my chest. We ended up sitting on the hood of his car in the freezing November air eating fries while students wandered past us across campus. Normal. Almost painfully normal. Which made everything harder. At one point, Chase glanced over at me and frowned slightly. "You've been looking at me weird all week." I nearly choked on a fry. "What?" "You keep staring at me like you're trying to solve a crime." "Well, maybe you look suspicious." "I do look suspicious," he admitted. "But usually you enjoy that." My heartbeat stumbled. Because that sounded dangerously close to flirting. Or maybe Chase had always flirted with me, and I was only noticing now. Honestly, I didn't trust my own perception anymore. He bumped his shoulder lightly against mine. "There's my Vincent," he said quietly when I finally smiled again. "My Vincent. Jesus Christ." I looked away immediately, and Chase noticed. Again. He always noticed. "Okay," he said slowly. "Seriously, what's happening with you?" I could feel the moment approaching like a cliff edge. Because eventually one of us was going to say something real. And honestly, I was terrified it would ruin us. "Can I ask you something?" I said carefully. Chase nodded immediately. "Always." I took a breath, then completely chickened out at the last second. "Have you ever liked someone for a long time and just not told them?" The second the question left my mouth, Chase went very still, like fully motionless. He looked straight ahead toward the empty parking lot for a few seconds before answering. "Yeah. Quiet. Honest." My pulse started hammering instantly. "What happened?" I asked softly. He let out a short laugh, without humor. "Nothing happened. That hurt to hear for reasons he didn't even know." "You never told them?" "No." "Why not?" He looked over at me then, and the eye contact almost knocked the air out of me, because suddenly it felt like we weren't talking hypothetically anymore. "Because some people matter too much to lose," he said quietly. There it was again. That unbearable sincerity. I felt physically nervous under his gaze now. Like one wrong movement would expose everything. Chase looked away first this time, jaw tightening slightly like he regretted saying that much. Then he forced a lighter tone. "So what brought this on?" I should have lied. Instead, somehow I said, "I think I know what it feels like now." Silence. Real silence. The kind where the world suddenly sounds far away. Chase turned toward me slowly. "What do you mean?" "Too late to run now." I stared down at the untouched fries in my hands because eye contact suddenly felt impossible. "There's someone," I admitted quietly. And Chase stopped breathing. Not dramatically, not loudly, but I heard the tiny inhale he tried to hide. "Oh," he said after a second. That one word almost broke my heart. Because suddenly he sounded careful. Guarded. Like he was preparing himself to hear about somebody else. I hated that instantly. "Yeah," I said softly. He nodded once and forced a smile that didn't fully reach his eyes. That's good, right? I don't know. Why not? Because it's you. Because I'm sitting next to you trying not to completely ruin my life. Because I heard you say you loved me, and now every second around you feels impossible. Instead, I said, it's complicated. Chase laughed quietly at that. Yeah, he murmured. It usually is. We sat there in silence again. Cold wind. Campus lights. Both of us pretending this conversation wasn't about each other. Then Chase asked the most dangerous question possible. Does he know? My chest tightened immediately. No. You gonna tell him? I looked over at him finally. Really looked at him. At the nervousness hidden under his calm expression. At the way his fingers flexed against the soda cup in his hand. At how badly he wanted the answer without understanding why yet. And suddenly I realized something devastating. Chase was scared too. Not just of losing me. Of hoping. I don't know. I admitted quietly. He nodded slowly. Then after a long pause. He'd be lucky if you did. God. That almost did it. I had spent years imagining what it would feel like if Chase ever saw me the way I saw him. Turns out the reality was somehow worse because now he did. And we were both too afraid to say it directly. Eventually Chase drove me back to my apartment. Neither of us talked much during the ride. But the tension between us felt different now. Closer. Thinner somehow. Like we were standing on opposite sides of the same locked door. When we pulled up outside my building, I reached for the handle too quickly. Then, I froze. Chase was looking at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. Soft. Nervous. Almost vulnerable. You know, he said slowly, whoever this guy is. I waited. I hope he deserves you. My throat tightened painfully. Because Chase had absolutely no idea he was talking about himself. After that night, Chase started looking at me differently. Or maybe he always had, and now I just couldn't unsee it. That was the problem with finally understanding someone's feelings. Suddenly, every glance carried too much meaning. Every silence felt loaded. Every small touch stayed with me for hours afterward. And Chase touched me constantly. A hand on my shoulder while passing behind me. His knee pressed against mine during movies. Fingers briefly catching my hoodie sleeve to get my attention. Before, I'd force myself to ignore it. Now, every tiny thing felt electric, which meant I was basically losing my mind full time. Friday night, Chase showed up at my apartment unannounced around 9 carrying snacks and 2 energy drinks. You're studying, he said immediately. That's a terrifying thing to say like you're disappointed in me. I am disappointed in you. He kicked the door shut behind him and dropped onto my couch like he lived there. Honestly, he practically did. I tried focusing on my laptop again while Chase stole chips from the bag he brought himself. 5 minutes later, you've reread the same paragraph 6 times. I'm aware. You want to tell me what's happening in that giant terrifying brain of yours? No. Cool. Love the communication. I smiled despite myself. And Chase caught it immediately. There he is, he said softly. Again with that tone. That unbearably warm tone he only used with me. I looked back down at my laptop too quickly. Chase watched me for another second before sighing dramatically and stretching out across the couch. You know what your problem is? I have several. You think too much. That's rich coming from you. I don't think at all, he replied proudly. Life happens to me like a cartoon. I laughed again. God. It felt good to laugh around him instead of constantly panicking. For a little while, things almost felt normal again. Then Chase ruined it completely. I had a dream about you last night, he said casually. Every muscle in my body locked up. What? He looked amused by my reaction immediately. Relax, psycho. It wasn't weird. That response does not make me less nervous. Chase grinned lazily from the couch. We were in a zombie apocalypse. I stared at him. You dreamt about me during the apocalypse? Yeah. And you died. Wow. Thanks. It was very emotional for me. I'm honored. But Chase didn't laugh this time. Instead, he looked at me quietly for a second before saying, I woke up genuinely upset. Something shifted in the room instantly, because that didn't feel casual anymore. And the worst part? I knew exactly what he meant. There's a specific kind of fear that comes with loving someone too much. Everything starts feeling fragile because losing them becomes unimaginable. I'd been living with that feeling for years. Now I was starting to realize Chase had been living there too. You care too much about me, I said before I could stop myself. The words slipped out softly. Honest. Dangerous. Chase's expression changed immediately. He sat up slightly on the couch, eyes fixed on mine now. Yeah, he said quietly. No joke. No deflection. Just yes. My heartbeat went completely uneven. I should have looked away. Instead, I held eye contact this time. Big mistake. Because the longer we stared at each other, the more obvious this entire situation became. The air suddenly felt too warm. Chase spoke first. Vincent. The way he said my name now felt unbearable. Too careful. Too full of things neither of us was saying directly. Yeah. He opened his mouth slightly like he was about to say something important. Then his phone buzzed loudly across the couch. The moment shattered instantly. Chase blinked hard and grabbed the phone almost aggressively. I looked away immediately, trying to calm my heartbeat before he noticed. Sorry, he muttered. It's fine. But something had changed in those few seconds. Something real. And I knew Chase felt it too because after that, neither of us could fully relax again. Around midnight, I finally closed my laptop with a groan. I'm done pretending to study. Proud of you. Shut up. Chase smiled softly. Then, stay with me tonight. My chest tightened instantly. He said it casually, but not casually enough. I hesitated just a second too long. And Chase noticed. Again, his expression shifted slightly. You don't have to, he said quickly. I just meant. No. I interrupted too fast. I want to. That seemed to genuinely surprise him, which hurt more than it should have. Because apparently Chase had fully convinced himself I might not want him around anymore. The drive back to his apartment was quieter than usual. Not uncomfortable, just heavy. At a red light, Chase suddenly tapped the steering wheel nervously before speaking. Can I ask you something? Sure. Are you scared of this? I looked over immediately. This? His grip tightened slightly on the wheel. Whatever's happening between us lately. There it was. Not direct, but closer than we'd ever gotten before. And honestly, I was exhausted. Exhausted from dancing around this. Exhausted from pretending I didn't know. Exhausted from being terrified all the time. So for once, I answered honestly. Yes. Chase nodded slowly like he expected that. Me too. God. I stared out the window because hearing him admit fear somehow made everything more real. After a long silence, Chase spoke again. But I think I'm more scared of losing you. That one almost broke me completely. Because it was the exact thing he'd said that night. The exact thing I wasn't supposed to hear. And suddenly I couldn't do this anymore. Couldn't keep pretending. Couldn't keep forcing him to stand alone in this terrifying halfway point between friendship and something else. Chase, I said quietly. Yeah. I turned toward him fully. And before I could lose my nerve, I asked, what if you already told me? The car went dead silent. Chase looked over slowly. What? My pulse was so loud now I could barely hear myself think. I swallowed hard. Then finally, I heard you the other night. Everything in his expression disappeared instantly. Not anger. Not embarrassment. Just complete, stunned silence. The night Marcus and Ethan were there. I continued quietly. I heard what you said. Chase stared at me like the world had tilted sideways. You? I wasn't trying to listen, I said quickly. I just heard my name and then. Oh my God. He looked genuinely horrified now. Chase. No, I just Jesus Christ. He pulled the car into the nearest empty parking lot, so abruptly it startled me. Then he just sat there gripping the steering wheel with both hands like he was trying to survive impact. I am so sorry, he said finally. What? I never wanted you to find out like that. My chest tightened painfully. That's your concern right now? Yes, he said immediately, finally looking at me. Of course it is. The raw panic in his face hit me hard. Because Chase wasn't embarrassed that he loved me. He was terrified he'd made me uncomfortable. I don't regret hearing it, I admitted softly. That made him freeze. Completely freeze. The silence after that felt enormous. Then carefully, almost cautiously. Vincent. I could barely breathe now. You said you were scared, I whispered. I was too. Chase looked at me for a long moment like he was afraid to understand what I meant. Then quietly. Tell me I'm not imagining this. And honestly, after 2 years of loving him in silence, hearing Chase sound hopeful for the first time in his life nearly shattered me. I don't think I answered him immediately. Not because I didn't know. Not because I was unsure. But because hearing Chase sound hopeful completely unraveled me. For years, I'd imagined this moment in 100 different ways. Most of them ended badly. Some ended with him pulling away. Some ended with me losing him completely. None of them prepared me for this version. For Chase looking at me like he was scared to breathe too hard in case the moment disappeared. Vincent, he said again quietly, please. And that did it. I looked down for half a second, gathered whatever courage I had left, then admitted, "You're not imagining it." The silence afterward felt enormous. Chase just stared at me. Then, "Oh my God," he laughed once under his breath, but it sounded shaky, disbelieving. "You're serious?" I nodded slowly. And suddenly Chase looked completely overwhelmed. Not cool, not confident, not smooth, just overwhelmed. He leaned back against the seat and covered his face briefly with one hand, like his brain genuinely couldn't process what was happening. "This is insane," he muttered. A nervous laugh escaped me. "You think this is insane? I've been losing my mind for a week." That made him look over immediately. "A week?" I gave him a look. "You confessed your love for me in the living room, Chase." "Technically, I confessed it to Marcus." Not helping. He groaned softly and dropped his head back against the seat. "I can't believe you heard that. I can't believe you meant it." That one slipped out before I could stop it. Chase turned toward me instantly. "What?" I shook my head slightly. I spent so long convincing myself I imagined all of this. His expression changed immediately. Softened. "Vin." "No. Seriously," I continued quietly. "Do you know how many times I told myself you were just being friendly?" Chase stared at me for a second before laughing softly in disbelief. "Friendly? You are friendly. I bought you food at midnight because you sounded sad over text. That could still technically be friendship. I remember your entire coffee order. You remember everyone's coffee order. I skipped dates to hang out with you. That shut me up immediately." Chase looked almost embarrassed after admitting that. Then quieter. "I've been in love with you for 2 years, Vincent." I was not subtle. The honesty in his voice hit me like a punch. 2 years. At the exact same time as me. Which meant while I was busy mourning feelings I thought could never happen, Chase had been sitting right beside me doing the exact same thing. "That's actually upsetting," I muttered. He blinked. "What is?" "We're both idiots." That finally got a real laugh out of him. God, I'd missed hearing him laugh without tension underneath it. For a minute, neither of us said anything. The car sat quiet around us while cold air fogged lightly against the windows. And then the reality started settling in. Chase loved me. I loved him. And somehow we were both finally aware of it. Which should have felt simple. Instead, it felt terrifying. Because now there was something real to lose. "I need to ask you something," Chase said softly. "Okay. Back there." He nodded slightly toward the road. "When you said you knew what it felt like." I smiled faintly. "Yeah, I meant you." The way his face changed almost wrecked me. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just genuine happiness breaking through all his nervousness at once. "You have no idea what that does to me," he admitted quietly. I looked down immediately because I physically couldn't survive eye contact while he sounded like that. Then Chase asked, "Can I tell you something really pathetic?" "Always." I had this whole speech planned. I laughed instantly. "You had a speech?" "Yes." "Oh my God." "Shut up," he muttered, already smiling. "Marcus kept threatening to confess for me if I didn't do it myself." "That's honestly fair." I was gonna wait until after graduation. I blinked. "What?" Chase shrugged helplessly. "I figured if you rejected me, at least we wouldn't have to survive another semester awkwardly." My chest tightened painfully at that. Because underneath all his joking, Chase had genuinely prepared himself for heartbreak. Just like I had. "That's really sad," I told him softly. "I know. And stupid. I know." I looked over at him then. Really looked at him. At the nervousness still lingering around his eyes. At the way he kept flexing his fingers against the steering wheel. At how carefully he was handling this entire conversation even now. Like I was something fragile. "You know what's funny?" I admitted quietly. "What?" "I thought you stopped liking me this week." His entire head snapped toward me. "What?" "You were acting weird." "Because you were acting weird. I heard you confess your love for me. And then you started avoiding eye contact." I was panicking. "I thought you were uncomfortable." We both stopped. Then simultaneously. "Oh my God." Chase started laughing first. Not polite laughter. Real laughter. The kind that folds him in half slightly. And honestly, relief hit me so hard I started laughing too. Because suddenly, all the tension of the past week felt ridiculous. Two idiots. Hopelessly in love. Accidentally terrifying each other for days. Eventually Chase wiped at his eyes and looked at me softly. "You really love me?" The vulnerability in that question hurt. Because for all his confidence socially, Chase had never sounded less certain about anything. "Yeah," I answered quietly. "I really do." He looked down immediately after that like the words physically affected him. Then after a second, "Come here." My heartbeat stumbled. "What?" Chase glanced over, nervous suddenly. Can I hug you, or is that weird now?" That almost destroyed me completely. Because somehow after confessing mutual love, Chase was still worried about crossing lines with me. I laughed softly. "No, idiot. It's not weird." The second I leaned across the center console, Chase wrapped his arms around me so tightly it knocked the air from my lungs. And the worst part? It felt familiar, like some part of us had wanted this forever. He buried his face briefly against my shoulder and let out a shaky breath. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that without overthinking it," he admitted quietly. My chest ached, because I knew exactly what he meant. We stayed like that for a long moment in the parked car, holding on to each other like neither of us fully trusted this was real yet. Then Chase pulled back just enough to look at me, close enough now that I could see every nervous thought crossing his face in real time. And suddenly the air changed again. Softer, heavier. His eyes flicked down briefly toward my mouth before immediately darting back up. "Vin," he said quietly, "I really want to kiss you right now." Every thought in my brain disappeared instantly. Every thought in my brain disappeared instantly. Not metaphorically, literally. 1 second I was functioning like a normal human being, and the next all I could focus on was the fact that Chase was looking at me like I was something important, something wanted. And honestly, that alone almost overwhelmed me. The inside of the car felt suddenly too small, too warm. Chase looked nervous now in a way I'd never seen before. Not socially awkward nervous. Not joking around nervous. Real nervous. Like despite everything we'd already admitted, he still genuinely didn't know what my answer would be. "Okay," I said softly, because apparently my mouth still worked even if my brain didn't. Chase blinked once. "Okay." I nodded slowly, and the relief that crossed his face hit me so hard it physically hurt. He moved carefully after that, slowly, like he was giving me every possible chance to change my mind. Honestly, that made it worse, because Chase being gentle with me had always been my weakness. His hand lifted hesitantly toward my face before stopping halfway. "Still okay?" he asked quietly. "God." I laughed softly from sheer emotional overload. "Yes, Chase." Then finally he kissed me. And somehow, impossibly, it felt exactly like him. Warm, careful, a little overwhelmed. Not dramatic, not rushed, just real. My hand grabbed instinctively at the sleeve of his hoodie because I needed something solid to ground myself. And Chase made this quiet sound against my mouth that nearly destroyed what remained of my self-control. Years. I had spent years imagining this. Turns out reality was infinitely worse for my emotional stability. When we finally pulled apart, Chase just stared at me for a second like he genuinely couldn't believe that it happened. Then, "Oh wow." I laughed breathlessly. "That's your response." "I had a better one planned," he admitted. "It's gone now." That made me smile immediately. And Chase's expression softened the second he saw it. "You have no idea how many times I wanted to do that," he said quietly. I looked down, suddenly overwhelmed again. Same. Silence settled between us after that, but not awkward silence. The good kind. The stunned kind. Like both of us were still catching up to reality. Then Chase ruined it completely by laughing under his breath. "What?" I asked. I just remembered every time our friends called us married and we acted offended. I groaned immediately. "Oh my God, they knew before we did." "They absolutely did." Chase leaned his head back against the seat, smiling to himself. "You know Marcus is going to become unbearable about this. He already thinks he's the smartest person alive. He literally told me last month, and I quote, 'You two are emotionally nauseating.'" I laughed again before I could stop myself. And honestly, that felt almost as intimate as the kiss. Because this was the thing I loved most about Chase. Even now, even in the middle of something huge and terrifying and life-changing, he still felt like home. The laughter faded gradually. Then Chase looked over at me again, softer this time. "So what happens now?" The question settled heavily between us. Because this was the scary part. Not the confession. Not the kiss. The after. I swallowed slowly. "I don't know." "Me neither." At least he admitted it. Chase rubbed nervously at the steering wheel before speaking again. "I don't want this to wreck us." "It won't. You sound very confident for someone who looked ready to pass out 10 minutes ago." "Shut up." He smiled. Then quieter. "I mean it, Vin." I knew he did. And suddenly I understood something important. Chase wasn't scared of being with me. He was scared of hurting me. I think. I said carefully. We already crossed the point where this could go back to normal. Chase laughed softly. Yeah, probably. But honestly, I admitted, I don't want normal anymore. The look he gave me after that nearly ruined me completely. Like hearing those words healed something in him. Good, he said quietly. Because I really don't think I can pretend anymore. Neither could I. Not after this. Eventually, we made it back to his apartment, though neither of us moved immediately after parking. It suddenly felt weirdly significant. Like once we walked inside, this became real in an entirely new way. You're thinking too hard again, Chase said softly. I always think too hard. I know. He reached over and squeezed my hand once. Still surreal. Still terrifyingly nice. Then finally, come inside, Vincent. The way he said my name now felt completely different. Not because his voice changed, because now I knew. Inside the apartment, everything looked exactly the same as always. Same couch, same kitchen light, same pile of hoodies over the chair. But somehow the entire space felt different now that we'd crossed the line we'd both been dancing around for years. Chase tossed his keys onto the counter and immediately started pacing slightly. That made me smile. You're nervous. I'm extremely nervous. You hit it better in the car. I was distracted by finally kissing you. My face got hot instantly. Chase noticed immediately and laughed softly. Oh, you're blushing. That's interesting. Don't make this worse. I physically cannot help it. God, how was he still this charming while I felt seconds away from emotional collapse? Chase stepped closer slowly, still watching me carefully. I need you to know something, he said quietly. What? I'm serious about you. The sincerity in his face made my chest ache immediately. This isn't some weird impulse thing, he continued. Or me experimenting, or whatever. I know what I feel about you. I stared at him for a second, then admitted softly. That was one of the things I was scared of. His expression shifted instantly. Vincent, no. I know it sounds stupid now, but before I heard you that night, I kept convincing myself maybe I imagined everything, because you'd never actually said anything. Chase looked genuinely upset hearing that. He stepped closer immediately. I am so in love with you, he said firmly. The words hit me like a physical force. Probably because this was the first time he'd said them directly to me. No hallway. No accidental overhearing. No hypotheticals. Just truth. And apparently Chase noticed exactly how hard that landed because his entire expression softened afterward. Hey, he said quietly. I looked up. You okay? I laughed weakly. Honestly, not really. That worried him instantly. Why? Because I wanted this for so long, I don't know what to do now that it's happening. The vulnerability of admitting that made my stomach twist. But Chase just looked at me like I'd said something precious. Then softly, maybe we figure it out together? And honestly, after loving him quietly for years, hearing Chase say together felt almost impossible to survive. The first few days after that felt unreal. Not in a dramatic movie way. In a quiet way. Like my brain kept expecting to wake up and realize none of it actually happened. But then Chase would look at me across the room with that unbearably soft expression on his face, and reality would hit me all over again. He loved me. Openly now. Without hiding it behind jokes or almost confessions. And honestly, I didn't know how to act normal around him anymore. Sunday morning, I woke up in Chase's apartment to the sound of cabinets slamming in the kitchen. I walked out half awake wearing one of his hoodies and immediately found him standing at the stove looking personally offended by scrambled eggs. Good morning to you too, I muttered. Chase looked over instantly. And there it was again. That look. God, I was never surviving this. His entire face softened the second he saw me. Morning, he said quietly. Then his eyes dropped briefly to the hoodie. Then back up again. That looks better on you. I rolled my eyes immediately, mostly because my heartbeat had already started acting stupid. You've been flirting nonstop for like 48 hours. I've had to keep it inside for 2 years, he replied. Now I'm compensating. That made me laugh despite myself. Chase smiled automatically hearing it. And suddenly I realized something. He looked happier. Lighter somehow. Like finally saying everything out loud had removed some constant pressure he'd been carrying around for years. You're staring again, he said. You're smug now. I'm in love. Leave me alone. The casualness of that sentence completely wrecked me. Because Chase said it so naturally. So easily. Like he wasn't scared anymore. Meanwhile, I still felt emotionally unstable every time he looked at me too long. He noticed immediately. You're doing the overwhelmed face. I do not have an overwhelmed face. You absolutely do. Chase abandoned the eggs completely and walked closer. You know you can relax, right? That seems unlikely. He laughed softly before reaching for my hand automatically. Still surreal. Still unfairly nice. I mean it, Vin, he said quietly. You don't have to panic every time I say something affectionate. That's easy for you to say. You've apparently been emotionally prepared for years. Prepared? He snorted. Vincent, I nearly had a heart attack in that parking lot. Fair. Still, he seemed steadier than me somehow. Maybe because Chase had already lived through the worst-case scenario in his head 1,000 times. He'd already prepared himself for rejection long before I even knew what was happening. Meanwhile, I was still adjusting to the fact that the person I loved actually loved me back. Honestly, that kind of happiness is terrifying, because suddenly there's something real to lose. You're thinking too much again, Chase murmured. I literally always think too much. I know. He squeezed my hand once. Then softer. You want to know something pathetic? What? I barely slept last night because I kept getting excited remembering you kissed me back. I stared at him, then immediately looked away because my face got hot so fast it physically hurt. Chase laughed instantly. Oh, that one got you bad. Shut up. Nope. I suffered for years. This is my reward. I groaned and tried pulling my hand away, but he just held on tighter, smiling. God, how had we been best friends this long without combusting? Eventually, Chase rescued the eggs before they became completely inedible, and we ended up eating breakfast at his kitchen counter like we'd done hundreds of times before. Except now, every tiny thing felt different. His knee brushing mine. The way his eyes kept drifting toward me unconsciously. How comfortable it suddenly felt to look back. At one point, Chase caught me staring. What? He asked softly. I hesitated, then admitted. I think I'm still trying to process this. Yeah. You've been my favorite person for years, I said quietly. And now suddenly I'm allowed to know you love me. The honesty in that sentence made Chase go completely still. Then very softly. Allowed. I shrugged awkwardly. You know what I mean. No, he said gently. Tell me. God. I looked down at my coffee because vulnerability around Chase suddenly felt way more dangerous now that he knew exactly how much power he had over me. I spent so long trying not to want too much from you, I admitted quietly, because I thought if I did, I'd ruin everything. The room went silent. Then Chase stood up immediately. Before I could even process what he was doing, he was standing directly in front of me, hands settling carefully on either side of my face. Vincent, he said softly, you could never want too much from me. That one almost broke me, because deep down, I think that had always been my biggest fear. Not rejection, not embarrassment, wanting someone more than they wanted me. But Chase was looking at me now like that had never even been possible. You have no idea how important you are to me, he continued quietly. I swallowed hard. I think I'm starting to. His expression softened even further somehow. Then, come here. He kissed me gently this time. Slow and warm and familiar already. And somewhere in the middle of it, I realized something that probably should have been obvious sooner. Nothing between us actually felt new. That was the crazy part. The honesty was new. The kissing was new. The saying I love you out loud was new. But the closeness, the comfort, the instinct to reach for each other, that had already been there all along. We just finally stopped pretending it was something else. Later that afternoon, Chase and I ended up stretched across his couch, watching a movie neither of us was paying attention to. At some point, he glanced over and smiled softly. What? I asked. You know what's weird? What? I thought being with you would feel different. My chest tightened slightly. Different bad. No, he said immediately. Different impossible. I blinked. Chase looked down at our intertwined hands thoughtfully. But honestly, he admitted quietly, it just feels like we finally stopped fighting it. And God, that was exactly it. Telling our friends was somehow more terrifying than confessing to each other. Which made absolutely no sense considering Marcus had practically solved this entire situation before we did. Still, by Tuesday night, Chase was pacing around his apartment like a man preparing for psychological warfare. You're wearing a hole in the floor, I informed him from the couch. I'm aware. You know they already think we're in love, right? That's actually making this worse. I laughed softly, and Chase immediately pointed at me. See? You're calm. Why are you calm? I'm not calm, I said. I'm just watching you unravel first. Supportive. Very supportive. Honestly, seeing Chase nervous was weirdly reassuring. For years, he'd always been the socially confident one between us. Watching him panic over something emotional made this feel real in a completely different way. He cared. A lot. Enough to be scared. You know Marcus is gonna act insufferable, I reminded him. He already texted me, "Did you tell your boyfriend yet this morning?" I nearly choked laughing. Chase groaned dramatically and dropped onto the couch beside me, throwing his head back. I hate him. No, you don't. No, he admitted miserably. I really don't. Then his expression softened slightly as he looked over at me. This okay? He asked quietly. I blinked. What? All of it. The nervousness hidden under the question hit me immediately. Because underneath Chase's teasing and pacing and overdramatic complaining, there was still that same fear lingering quietly beneath everything. Fear of losing this. Losing me. Getting it wrong somehow. So I reached over automatically and laced my fingers through his. Yeah, I said softly. It's okay. The relief in his face appeared instantly. God, I loved him so much it was actually embarrassing. An hour later, Marcus and Ethan arrived carrying drinks and way too much confidence. Marcus took one look at Chase, sitting suspiciously close to me on the couch, and immediately pointed at us. Oh my God, Chase groaned. Can you relax for 5 seconds? No, Marcus said instantly. Absolutely not. Is this happening? Ethan looked between us once before laughing softly. Finally, that word hit me weirdly hard, because apparently this really had been obvious to everyone except us. Chase rubbed both hands over his face dramatically. I already regret inviting you over. Marcus ignored him completely and stared directly at me. Vincent, blink twice if he emotionally tortured you into dating him. I did no such thing, Chase argued immediately. Actually, I said carefully, he did accidentally confess his love for me in front of me without realizing I was listening. Marcus dropped onto the armchair so fast he almost missed it. I'm sorry, what? Ethan started laughing immediately. Meanwhile, Chase looked ready to drive directly into traffic. Please don't tell this story, he muttered. No, Marcus said firmly. Actually, I need every detail immediately. Watching Chase get embarrassed was genuinely one of the best experiences of my life after years of him constantly making me blush instead. You told him? Ethan asked Chase, still laughing. I technically told you, Chase replied bitterly. Marcus looked delighted. Oh, this is incredible. It was horrifying, Chase informed him. Yeah, because you're dramatic. I confessed my feelings by accident. And somehow it still worked, Marcus replied. That's called destiny. Chase threw a pillow at him. The entire apartment dissolved into laughter after that. And honestly, something inside me relaxed for the first time all week. Because nobody looked shocked. Nobody treated this like a disaster. Nobody acted like Chase and I becoming something more was strange. If anything, they looked relieved. At one point, Ethan shook his head smiling. You know what the worst part is? What? Chase asked suspiciously. You two were already basically dating. That is not true. Marcus immediately cut in. You grocery shopped together. That means nothing. You had a shared movie ranking system. That also means nothing. You literally knew each other's therapy schedules. I covered my face laughing while Chase looked personally betrayed. We're close friends. You're emotionally codependent, Marcus corrected. Honestly, fair. After a while, the conversation shifted naturally into other things. But every once in a while, I'd catch Chase looking over at me with this soft, disbelieving expression like he still couldn't fully process that this was real. And every single time, my chest tightened painfully in the best way. Later that night, after Marcus and Ethan finally left, the apartment went quiet again. Chase closed the door behind them and immediately leaned against it with a long exhale. Well, he muttered. That was humiliating. I laughed. You survived. Barely. Then he looked over at me. And just like that, all the joking faded from his face again. The apartment suddenly felt quieter. Smaller somehow. You okay? He asked softly. I nodded. Yeah. But Chase kept studying me carefully anyway. What? I asked finally. He hesitated. Then, I think I keep waiting for this to disappear. That hit me hard instantly. I walked closer without even thinking about it. It's not disappearing, I said quietly. Chase looked at me for a long moment like he needed to hear that more than he realized. Then softly, you promise? God, there was something so vulnerable about the way he asked that question. Not confident, not joking, just Chase. Completely real with me. And honestly, that version of him might have been the one I loved most. I promise, I answered. He let out a slow breath after that, shoulders relaxing slightly like he'd been holding tension there all day. Then his mouth curved into a small smile. "You know what's crazy?" he murmured. "What?" "I spent 2 years convincing myself I had to settle for being your best friend." My chest tightened immediately. Chase stepped closer slowly. "And now you're standing here looking at me like this. Like what?" "Like maybe you love me as much as I love you." I laughed softly. "Chase, I'm pretty sure I've crossed maybe already." That smile widened instantly. Then he reached for my hand automatically, thumb brushing lightly across my knuckles like he still couldn't quite believe he was allowed to do it openly now. And suddenly I realized something important. For years, loving Chase had felt lonely, heavy, impossible. But standing there with him now, it felt easy. Not because relationships are easy, not because fear disappeared completely, but because for the first time, neither of us was carrying it alone anymore.